Just full disclosure, I'm about to alienate and anger some of you. You're going to yell to the program directors of America. I apologize when you get the angry emails and phone calls. But what I'm saying is true, whether you like to believe it or not. The truth does not care about your feelings. The truth is the truth. It is ironic because I'm being attacked on social media right now by some people. I tweeted out that it was political malpractice for the Republicans not to have had Donald Trump give the State of the Union response. They had Katie Britt of Alabama. They put the female from Alabama in a kitchen to give her response, and y'all, it's just, it wasn't good. They should have had Donald Trump do it. He's their nominee. And I'm being attacked by some who hate Donald Trump, saying that, oh my gosh, you've sold out. This is just for your radio audience. You've sold out. And I'm like, no, this is an objective political fact as someone who's run political campaigns. You should have had Donald Trump give your response. Whether I care for the man or not, I've been critical of him, not a fan. Prefer his policies to Biden, but y'all know how I feel about him and him about me. But it was absolutely political malpractice. Donald Trump would have given a more entertaining and engaging response. It would have been memorable, and when the media stepped out of it, it would have reminded people that the media hates Donald Trump and they're not going to give him a fair hearing. They should have done it. It was malpractice that they didn't. So I'm getting attacked for being too pro-Trump. Here's where I get attacked for being too not pro-Trump. This morning, when True Social came back online, it crashed. Actually, nope. Looks like it was 11:05 p.m. last night. Donald Trump tweeted this. If you get rid of TikTok, Facebook, and Zuckerschmuck will double their business. I don't want Facebook, who cheated in the last election, doing better. They are a true enemy of the people. Full disclosure, I know Donald Trump, and I know Mark Zuckerberg, and I would rather spend an afternoon with Mark Zuckerberg than with Donald Trump. Say what you will about Facebook, and I've said much about Facebook that I disagree with. Facebook refuses to operate in China, and when China started curbing rights in Hong Kong, pulled out of Hong Kong and gave up a significant chunk of business in China and Hong Kong and a large revenue stream because they didn't want the Chinese to access their database. China requires that if you do business in China, all of your internet business through China route through Chinese servers that the Chinese communists get to access. And Mark Zuckerberg's wife, her family fled. The history of her family were people who had to be refugees from the communists. They ultimately came to the United States. He is not a supporter of communism, communists, or the Chinese Communist Party. You may not like him, but he is a man who puts his company as an American company, not as a global elitist company. You can disagree with what they did in the election in 2020. You can call it Zuckbucks, whatever you want to call it. But I, for one, would far prefer our children use Facebook than use TikTok, which is overseen by the Chinese Communist Party, which has developed TikTok as a spy app against the United States. And you have no more proof of that than what TikTok did yesterday in the United States Congress. Congress is considering a bill that would force ByteDance, the parent company of TikTok, to divest its ties to the Chinese Communist Party. This legislation has nothing to do with the content of TikTok. It has nothing to do with the First Amendment and free speech. It has nothing to do with any of that. What it has to do with is that the Chinese Communist Party controls ByteDance, the owner of TikTok, and we know that China has been adjusting the algorithm to pollute the minds of American children. Unless you have an established account on TikTok, when you establish an account on TikTok, your algorithm defaults to pro-transgender activism and pro-Hamas activism. Your default algorithm on TikTok when you start an account defaults to the left and left-wing talking points and anti-American talking points. China has seeded anti-American propaganda throughout TikTok, and China has access to the database and servers to surveil the American public. For Donald Trump to defend TikTok is highly irresponsible and suggests that a second term of Donald Trump would all be about grievance and revenge at the expense of the integrity and national security of the United States. And that's a problem. This was a mistake on his part. Yesterday on Capitol Hill, members of Congress began getting phone calls from children. Many of them, and this is not an exaggeration, many of the children who called yesterday when TikTok put out a push alert to its audience with the phone numbers for members of Congress telling the kids who use TikTok to call their congressman to save TikTok, many of the kids said they would commit suicide if TikTok were shut down, because TikTok told the kids that Congress wants to shut down TikTok, which isn't true. Now, here's the irony here. The delicious irony is that one of the pieces of information Congress has gathered against TikTok is that TikTok, on behalf of the communist Chinese, pushes out disinformation to the American public. And here comes TikTok pushing out disinformation to the American public, telling American kids that they're going to turn off TikTok, which is not true. Congress is perfectly happy to allow TikTok to exist, just not in the hands of the Chinese Communist Party. So kids were calling Congress yesterday saying they were going to commit suicide or kill the members of Congress. A bunch of senior citizens did this as well, but mostly it was teenagers. Now, the fact of the matter is teenagers don't vote. But because TikTok did this is the first time I can recall a contentious piece of legislation passing a congressional committee unanimously, 50-0. It's gone to the floor of the House. This legislation is necessary. It's disturbing that Donald Trump would put his grudges and grievances against Facebook over this legislation. Donald Trump is advancing the interests of the Chinese Communist Party by nursing his grudge against Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg. That's a fact. You don't like it. I realize it. Some of you are yelling at me now in your car or in your office. Some of you are reaching to switch me off, but you better accept it as a fact that by Donald Trump trying to kill this piece of legislation, he's advancing China's interests over the national security of the United States, all because he's mad at Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook. All the legislation does, maybe no one's told him, maybe he doesn't understand it, maybe he was lied to, or maybe it's Jeff Yass, who is a massive conservative donor to certain members of Congress who are opposed to the TikTok legislation. He is a big Club for Growth guy. He's supported Thomas Massie and several others. He's very libertarian. He's opposed to the legislation. He's a massive investor in TikTok. He happens to have a massive investment in TikTok, and he's been writing checks, I suspect, to help Donald Trump. So is Trump actually nursing a grudge or listening to a donor? Either way, it's upsetting because TikTok is a threat to our national security. TikTok, as it is controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, has literally been flooding our children with indoctrination and transgenderism so they'll consent to sterilization. They've been force-feeding our kids propaganda about Hamas and the Palestinians to hate the Jews. If you don't have your TikTok set up and ready to go already, you're going to see that algorithm. If you don't believe me, go set up a brand new TikTok account on a separate device, different from your current device because they'll have the MAC address for your device. Go get someone else's phone that's never used TikTok. Set up a TikTok account and watch the default algorithm slowly program your brain to hate America. It's what the Chinese Communist Party does. Not only that, but whether it did that or not, it would still be dangerous because China will have a backdoor on your device to spy on you. And you think, well, Erickson, I don't care. You don't care. What about when your kid later in life goes to get a job and, when you were 16 years old, here are the things you were looking at on TikTok when your parents went around. In the second hour of this program today, I covered this news story that's not getting enough attention A sergeant in the Army in military intelligence has been selling our military secrets to China. Made $42,000 selling American classified information about our handling of Taiwan and its military capabilities to the Chinese. A 25-year-old. Now, when your 16-year-old is 25 and gets in the Army and China approaches them and says, we're going to destroy you. We know what you've been looking at on your phone because we've been surveilling your phone through TikTok, and we know these are the sorts of sites you accessed, and we've built a psychographic profile, and we know about your deviancies online that you think no one knows. Give us the information or we're going to destroy you. Do you really not believe the Chinese communists wouldn't stoop that low? Do you really not believe they can't? You people already think your phones listen to you because you get the advertisements, and maybe they do. If you think that every other app on your phone is doing that, think about what the Chinese communists who hate the United States and want to undermine us are doing. And Donald Trump is calling for that app to be preserved because he doesn't like Facebook. TikTok is dangerous. You see it as an innocuous app that makes you happy. What you don't see are the Chinese using the data off your phone to profile you. What you don't see is China using the data off the phones of other people using TikTok who are more significant in national security than you so that China can undermine them. And what you don't see is the information China is pushing to your child on their device through TikTok to indoctrinate them against your country that you love. This legislation needs to pass Congress. TikTok delenda est. TikTok must be destroyed so long as it's controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. The legislation that advanced 50-0. Ask yourself, in a bitterly divided Congress where everybody hates each other, when is the last time such a significant piece of legislation passed 50-0? This legislation needs to pass, and Donald Trump should walk back his complaints. Because the legislation preserves TikTok. It allows TikTok to continue on so long as it's not controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. That's what the legislation does. It's not a free speech legislation. It's not about the First Amendment. It's about the Chinese Communist Party controlling an app used by so many Americans and using that app for nefarious purposes, weaponizing against you, weaponizing it against your kid, weaponizing it against this country in ways you can't even conceive of right now. And the Chinese are 5 steps ahead of you. Multiple members of our military intelligence community are selling secrets to China already. Think about when China no longer has to buy those secrets because they can force people through blackmail of what they've done on their devices that they've stalked them through with TikTok on their phones to be able to get their way. TikTok is a national security threat as it exists. It seems like a harmless, innocuous app until you start studying what the Chinese Communist Party is doing with it. It needs to go, and shame on Donald Trump for saying that it should be preserved because he's mad at Mark Zuckerberg. Mark Zuckerberg is not a traitor to this country, and Mark Zuckerberg shut down his company in China and sacrificed all of that revenue because he didn't want to be controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. You may have any criticism you want, but the man gave up a fortune doing business in China because he didn't want the Chinese communists controlling his app. And in this former president, who wants to be the next president, is willing to preserve a company in the control of the Chinese Communist Party just because he's mad at another American. That's not the way to conduct business or the national security policy of this country. TikTok delenda est.